So we're just gonna start at law one. That's crazy. Never outshine the master. Law one. Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. If you desire to please and impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite. Inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. Mm. All right, now I might fall asleep, but if I snore too hard, I'm gonna just take the microphone off when I feel sleepy. All right. Transgression of the law. Nicholas Fouquet, Louis a third finance minister in the first years of his reign, was a generous man who loved lavish parties, pretty women, and poetry. He also loved money, for he led an extravagant lifestyle. Fouquet was clever, very much indispensable to the king. Very much indispensable to the king. So when the prime minister Julius Mazarin died in 1661, the finance minister expected to be named the successor. Instead, the king decided to abolish the position. This and other signs made Fouquet suspect that he was falling out of favor, and so he decided to ingratiate, ingratiate himself with the king by staging the most spectacular party the world had ever seen. The party ostensible purpose. I'm gonna have to get me a fucking dictionary, a mini one. The party ostensible purpose would be commemorate the completion of Fouquet's chateau Valle Cinquemate, but its real function was to pay tribute to the king, the guest of honor. The most brilliant nobility of Europe and some of the greatest minds of the time, La Fonte La Rechefagato, Maremi di Seville, attended the party. Melior wrote a play for the occasion in which he himself was to perform at the evening's conclusion. The party began with a lavish seven-course dinner. Damn, some mighty fucking big dinner. Oh, shit. Seven-course dinner featuring foods from the Orient never before tasted in France, as well as new dishes created especially for the night. The meal was accompanied by music commissioned by Fouquet in the honor of the king. We're reading 48 Laws of Power just in case somebody don't know. But that's the first law. I don't know why I can't see it. It's just like my phone's. I don't know. But shit. After dinner, there was a promenade through the chateau's garden. The grounds of Fountain Vaux les Vicomtes were to be the inspiration for Versailles. 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 Fouquet personally accompanied the young king through the geometrically aligned arrangements in shrubbery and flower beds. Arriving at the garden canals, they wished a fireworks display, which was followed by the performance of Molière play. The party ran well into the night, and everyone agreed it was the most amazing affair they ever attended. The next day, Fouquet was arrested by the king's head musketeer, d'Artagnan. D'Artagnan. Artagnan. 3 months later, he went on trial for stealing from the country's treasury. Actually, most of the stealing he was accused of, he had done on King's behalf, and with the King's permission, Fouquet was found guilty and sent to the most isolated prison in France, high in the Pyrenees Mountains, where he spent the last 20 years of his life in solitary confinement. Hi, Asher. But yeah, so interpretation. Louis the XIV. I don't know what the hell. What is that? Like the 13, 15, 16, something. The Sun King was was a proud and arrogant man who wanted to be the center of attention at all times. Sound like niggas. Sound like people. He could not countenance countenance being outdone and lavished by anyone, and certainly not his finance minister. To succeed Fouquet, Louis chose Jean Baptiste Colbert, a man famous for his parsimony and for giving the dullest parties in Paris. Colbert made sure that any money liberated from the treasury went straight into Louis' hands. With the money, Louis built a palace even more magnificent than Fouquet's, the glorious palace of Versailles. Versailles. He used the same architects, decorators, and garden designers. And at Versailles, shit, man, I don't know. Louis hosted parties even more extravagant than the one that cost Fouquet his freedom. Let us examine the situation. The evening of the party, as Fouquet presented spectacle to Louis, each more magnificent than the one before. He imagined the affair of demonstrating his loyalty and devotion to the king. Not only did he think the party would put him back in the king's favor, he thought it would show his good taste, his connections, and his popularity, making him indispensable to the king and demonstrating that he would make an excellent prime minister. Instead, however, each new spectacle, each appreciative smile bestowed by the guests of Fouquet, made it seem to Louis that his own friends and subjects were more charmed by the finance minister than by the king himself. No, he tripping. He trying to be so slick and all that. Whole time the king looking like, man, get him out of there. I'm trying to figure out where this going, but it's like, just keep reading. Just keep reading, nigga. But anyway, rather than flattering Louis, Fouquet's elaborate party offended the king's vanity. Louis would not admit this to anyone, of course. Instead, he found a convenient excuse to rid himself of a man who had inadvertently made him feel insecure. Such is the fate, in some form or other, of all those who unbalance the master's sense of self, poke holes in his vanity, or made him doubt his preeminence. When the evening began, Fouquet was at the top of the world. By the time it had ended, he was at the bottom. Voltaire, 1694 by through 1778. Observance of the law. In the early 1600s, the Italian astronomer and the mathematician Galileo found himself in a precious position. He depended on generosity of great rulers to support his research, and so, like all Renaissance scientists, he would sometimes make gifts of his inventions and discoveries to the leading patrons of the time. Once, for instance, he presented a military compass he had invented to the Duke of Gonzaga. Then he dedicated a book explaining the use of compass to Medi- Medicis. 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 I'm thinking about the damn love and hip hop nigga shit. But anyway, Medicis. Both rulers were grateful, and through the Galileo, 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 Galileo was able to find more students to teach. No matter how great the discovery, however, his patrons usually paid him with gifts, not cash. This made for a life of constant insecurity and dependence. Terrible. This must be a easier There must be an easier way, he thought. Galileo hit on a new strategy in 1610 where he discovered the moons of Jupiter. Instead of dividing the discovery among his patrons, giving one the telescope he had used, dedicating a book to another, and so on and so he had done in the past, he decided to focus exclusively on Medicis. He chose the Medicis for one reason. Shortly after Cosimo I had established the Medici dynasty. In 1540, he had made Jupiter the mightiest of the gods. The Medici symbol, a symbol of power that went beyond politics and banking, one link to ancient Rome and its divinities. Galileo, Galileo turned his discovery of Jupiter's moons into a cosmic event. This shit gotta get super good at some point. Damn. Galileo and Galileo. All right. Honoring the Medicis' greatness, shortly after the discovery, he announced that the bright stars, the moons of Jupiter, offered themselves in the heavens to his telescope. At the same time, in the Cosimo enthronement, he said that the number of moons four harmonized with the number of the Medicis. Cosimo had three brothers, and that the moons orbited Jupiter as these four suns revolved around Cosimo, the dynasty founder. More than coincidence, this showed that the heavens themselves reflected the ascendancy of the Medici family. After he dedicated the discovery to the Medicis, Galileo commissioned an imbel representing Jupiter sitting on a cloud, with the four stars circling about him, and presented this to the Cosimo as a symbol of his links to the stars. In 1610, Cosimo II made Galileo his official court philosopher and mathematician with a full salary. For a scientist, this was the coup of a lifetime. The days of begging for patronage was over. Interpretation. In one stroke, Galileo gained more with his new strategy than he had in years of begging. The reason is simple. All masters want to appear more brilliant than other people. They do not care about science or empirical truth or the latest invention. They care about their name and their glory. Galileo gave the Medicis infinitely, infinitely more glory by linking their name with cosmic forces than he had by making them the patrons of some new scientific gadget or discovery. Scientists are not spared the vagaries, vagaries of court life and patronage. They too must serve masters who hold the purse strings, and their great intellectual powers can make the master feel insecure, as if he were only there to supply the funds. An ugly, ignoble job. The producer of a great work wants to feel he is more than just a provider of financing. He wants to appear creative and powerful, and also more important than the work produced in his name. Instead of insecurity, you must give him glory. Galileo did not challenge the intellectual authority of the Medicis with his discovery or make them feel inferior in any way by literally aligning them with the stars. He made them shine brilliantly among the courts of Italy. He did not outshine the master. He made the master outshine all others. Keys to power. What's up? No. Shit. Let me fuck my shit up. Oh yeah. So keys keys to power. Everyone have insecurities. When you show yourself in the world and display your talents, you naturally stir up all kinds of resentment, envy, and other manifestations of insecurity. This is to be expected. You cannot spend your life worrying about the petty failings of others. With those above you, however, you must take a different approach. When it comes to power, outshining the master perhaps the worst mistake of all. Do not fool yourself into thinking that life has changed much since the days of Louis the 83rd and the Medicis. Louis the 16th, Louis the 13th, whatever the fuck. XIV, what's that? XIV. Anybody know out of the two people? Anyway, those who attain high standing in life are like kings and queens. They want to feel secure in their positions, superior to those around them in intelligence with the charm. It is a deadly best common misperception to believe that by displaying and vaunting your gifts and talents, you are winning the master's affection. And don't be out here thinking you this and that to this to niggas and people and all that shit. You ain't. Nigga, I want you out the way. Anyway, he may feign appreciation, but at his first opportunity, he will replace you with someone else less intelligent, less attractive, less threatening. Damn, boy, that shit crazy. Just as Louis XIII replaced the sparkling Fouquet with the bland Colbert, and as with Louis, he will not admit the truth, but will find an excuse to rid himself of your presence. Mm. Damn, why ain't Ben read this? The law involves two rules that you must realize. First, you can inadvertently outshine a master simply by being yourself. There are masters who are more insecure than others. Damn. Monstrously insecure. You may naturally outshine them by your charm and grace. No one no one had more natural talents than Astore Manfredi, Prince of Faenza, the most handsome of all the young princesses of Italy, princes of Italy. He captivated. Yo, stop, man. My bad. He captivated. Come here. He captivated his subjects with generosity and open spirit. In the year 1500, Caesar laid siege to Faenza. When the city surrendered, the citizens expected the worst from the cruel Borgia, who, however, decided to spare the town. He simply occupied his fortress, executed none of his citizens, and allowed Prince Manfredi, 18 at the time, to remain with his court in complete freedom. A few weeks later, those soldiers hauled Astore Manfredi away to a Roman prison. A year after that, his body was fished out of the river to bear a stone tied around his neck. Borgia justified the horrible deed with some sort of trumped up charge of treason and conspiracy. But the real problem was that he was notoriously vain and insecure. The young man was outshining him without even trying. Giving that, that's how they do you, yo. That's that's how they do you. Like this shit been going on since the 1550s. Get nigga out of there cause he just too slick or he too smooth or he too real without even trying. Get you slam out of there. Shit me. A year after the his body was but the real notoriously insecure. Uh, mere presence of Boogie seemed less attractive and charismatic. The lesson is simple. If you cannot help being charming and superior, you must learn to avoid such monsters of vanity. Either that or find a way to mute your good qualities when in the company of a Caesar Borgia. Second, never imagine that because the master loves you, you can do anything you want. Did entire books could be written about favorites who fell out of favor by taking their status for granted. For daring to outshine in the late 16th century Japan, the favorite emperor Hideyoshi was a man called Senno Rikia, the premier artist of the tea ceremony, which had been which had become an obsession with the nobility. He was one of the Hideyoshi's most trusted advisors, had his own apartment in the palace, and was honored throughout Japan. Yet in 1591, Hideyoshi had himself arrested and sentenced to death. Rikyu took his own life instead. The cause for his sudden change of fortune was discovered later. It seems Rikyu, former peasant and later court favorite, had a wooden statue made of himself wearing sandals, a sign of nobility. Damn. A sign of nobility and posing lawfully. He had this statue placed in the most important temple inside the palace gates, in clear sight of roy- royalty, who often would pass by to Hideyoshi. This sig- to Hideyoshi, this signified that Rikyu had no sense of limits, presuming that he had the same rights as those of the highest nobility. He had forgotten that his position depended on the emperor, and that became and had come to believe that he had earned it on his own. Niggas get big headed. They knock you straight out that shit. An unforgivable miscalculation of his own importance, and he paid for it with his life. Remember the following: never take your position for granted. Never let any factors you receive go to your head. Knowing the dangers of outshining your master, you can turn to this law to your advantage. First, you must flatter and puff up your master. Overt flattery can be effective but has its limits. It's, it is too direct and obvious and looks bad to other courtiers. Discreet flattery is much more powerful. If you are more intelligent than your master, for example, seem the opposite. Make him appear more intelligent than you. Act naive. Make it seem that you need his expertise. Commit harmless mistakes that will not hurt you in the long run but will give you the chance to ask for help. Masters adore such requests. A master who cannot bestow on you the gifts of his experience may direct rancor and ill will at you instead. If your ideas are more creative than your master's, ascribe them to him in as public a manner as possible. Make it clear that your advice is merely an echo of his advice. If you surpass your masters in wit, it is okay to play the role of the court jester, but do not make him appear cold or surly by compassion. Tone down your humor if necessary, and find ways to make him seem the dispenser in amusement and good cheer. If you are naturally more sociable and generous than your master, be careful not to be be careful not to be the cloud that blocks his radiance from others. He must appear as the sun around which everyone revolves, radiating power and brilliance, the center of attention. If you are thrust into the position of entertaining him, a display of your limited means may win you his sympathy. Any attempt to impress him with your grace and generosity can prove fatal. Learn from Fouquet or pay the price. In all of these cases, it is not a weakness to disguise your strengths if in the end they lead to power. By letting others outshine you, you remain in control. Instead of being a victim of their insecurity, this will all come in handy the day you decide to rise above your inferior status. If, like Galileo, you can make your master shine even more in the eyes of others, then you are a godsend and you will be instantly promoted. Image. The stars in the sky, there can be only one sun at a time. Never obscure the sunlight or rival the sun's brilliance. Rather, fade into the sky and find ways to heighten the master's star's intensity. Damn. Hmm. Authority. Avoid outshining the master. All superiority is adios. Odios. But the superiority of a subject over his prince is not only stupid, it is fatal. We out here trying to be bigger than a program, bigger than a big man. They may be related to the sun and just as brilliant, but they never appear in her company. Belstar Gratian, 1601 through 1658. Reversal. You cannot worry about upsetting every person you come across, but you must be selectively cruel. If your superior is a fallen star, there is nothing to fear from outshining him. Do not be merciful. Your master had no such scruples in his own cold-blooded climb to the top. Gauge his strength. If he is weak, discreetly hasten his downfall. Outdo, outcharm, outsmart him at key moments. If he is very weak and ready to fall, let nature take its course. Do not risk outshining a feeble superior. It might appear cruel or spiteful, but if your master is firm in his position, yet you know yourself to be more capable, bide your time and be patient. It is natural course of things that power eventually fades and weakens. Your master will fall someday, and if you play it right, you will outlive and someday outshine him. Woo! Is it grippy? Fuck is that? Is it grippy? Is what grippy? Is what grippy? Is what grippy, man? Law number two. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. Woo! That's enough, man. Law number two tomorrow, dog.